Hello, team, and welcome to Bureaucracy. I'm your host, Emily Gross, and I'm so excited today because I have a wonderful professor of modern Middle Eastern history at Penn State. His name is Tamir Sorek. Tamir, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hello, Emily. Thank you for inviting me.
So, obviously, it's been a crazy 7 months, 8 months since October 7th, and all anyone can talk about, all anyone can think about is Israel and Palestine, Israel, Gaza. And obviously, it is a very tumultuous relationship for many, 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 many years. And would love for you to tell us more about yourself, why we should trust what you're about to say, and what you're going to teach us about.
Well, first, I would not fully trust anyone, including me. We have to be always suspicious. And at the same time, we should not mistrust anyone at the same level. And I think I do bring something uncommon to the table when we discuss things. First, I have dedicated my professional career to study this conflict, different aspects of this conflict. I published three books and dozens of articles. And this is mostly what I'm doing in my daily life. So I'm very much invested in this. But it is beyond the professional background. I think also I have an uncommon perspective on things. I grew up in the heart of mainstream Zionism, in a kibbutz in the northern of Israel, on the border between Israel and Lebanon. I experienced the tension of the conflict firsthand throughout my childhood. What I want to say that I'm not objective, and no one should expect me to be objective because objectivity does not exist. But at the same time, since I dedicated my professional life to study this conflict, I've been exposed to the Palestinian point of view in a way that the vast majorities of Israelis are not exposed to. And I listened. And I think I developed an ability to look at the social reality of the conflict in a relatively nuanced way. I'm not unique in that. There are other scholars or activists from both sides, Palestinians or Israelis, who grew up in certain circumstances and learned to see reality from a diverse points of view. But still, I think I belong to a relatively small group who developed this ability to view things. And this is because it is not only my professional life, but also I developed a network of friendship among Palestinians. So on the one hand, I have my family, my friends, my childhood friends, to whom I'm connected, and I listen to them. But I also have my Palestinian friends, whether they live in the United States, inside Israel, in the West Bank, or in the Gaza Strip, or in other places. And whenever I look at the events, I also have their voice and their point of view on reality in my mind when I look at it. So although I do not bring the objective point of view because it does not exist, I think I bring an uncommon perspective.
Great, which is the self-awareness of that is very important, and excited to hear history from your point of view and from what you've studied. So obviously, it is impossible to get through the intense ins and outs and nuances of Israeli and Palestinian history for the past, let's say, 100 years, but in the best way that you can, in hitting all the high moments, all the low moments of, can you please give us the best overview of history and how we got here?
So I will begin a little bit earlier than 100 years, with your permission. I think it is important. Yeah.
Please.
So at the end of the 19th century, Palestine is part of the Ottoman Empire. The country does not have the same borders that we know today of what people call Palestine of Israel, but people who lived there had a general sense that they live in Palestine without defined borders. The country was mostly Muslim in its population, mostly Arabic speaking in its population. There were also sizable minorities, a big Christian minority who was also linguistically mostly Arab, and also a significant Jewish minority who lived in the country. Back then, religious differences did not define political divisions. They were all citizens of the Ottoman Empire, and the reality starts to change gradually with what we call the Zionist immigration. The Zionist immigration begins with waves of immigrants coming from Europe with an ideology of establishing a political unit governed by Jews and for Jews in Palestine or the land of Israel, which is the same territory that has different names. And the plan did not include a real thinking about the point of view, the perspective of the population who already lived in the country. Yeah, first Zionists were aware that other people live there, but they did not think that they have the right to decide about the future of the country. The Ottoman Empire was not happy about this plan, but was not determined to block it. It was not very strong at the time. But in 1917, the country was occupied by the United Kingdom. And shortly after that, the Ottoman Empire dissolved and ended. So now the country is ruled by new rulers, European rulers. Shortly before Britain occupied the country, Britain published a very famous document called the Balfour Declaration, in which it declared its support for establishing a homeland for the Jewish people in Palestine. The local population of Palestine, which was mostly Arab, was concerned. Arab Muslim and Arab Christians started to cooperate against what they see as a great threat to their future in the country. And for the 30 years of the rule of Britain in Palestine, because of British policy, the demography of the country was significantly changed. Until 1947, 1/3 of the population became Jewish. It happened not only because of the Zionist ideology, but because Jews escaped from Europe. They faced persecution, anti-Semitism, and especially after 1933, when the Nazi Party took control over Germany, and this event provided significant momentum to Zionist immigration to the country. If we talk about 150,000 Jews who lived in Palestine in the early 1930s, within 15 years, they became 1/3, which is about 650,000 people who lived in Palestine. The Arab population of Palestine resisted in several waves of violent resistance, but were unable to change the policy. Britain continued to impose the pro-Zionist policy. They reconsidered it a little bit in the late 1930s with the beginning of the Second World War, but not to the extent that it really changed the demographic shift in the country. In 1947, for Britain, controlling Palestine looked more like a burden than an asset, and they transferred the decision to the United Nations. The United Nations, a new body, decided to divide Palestine into two states, an Arab state and a Jewish state. The Jewish state was supposed to be on slightly more than half of the country, and the Arab state, slightly less than half of the country. Even in the territory that was supposed to be a Jewish state, almost half of the population was Arab. For the Arabs in Palestine, this looked like an extreme unjust decision. They did not think that the UN have the right to decide for them, the majority in the country, about the future of the country. They did not think that they should be subjugated to Jewish rule in any part of the country. And generally, there was no official body to make decisions about it by then, but the general sentiment was against it. For the Jews in Palestine, this looked like the realization of many generations of dreams of having a Jewish state in Palestine. And soon after the decision, in late November 1947, a violent conflict broke in the country. In mid-May, when the British left, the State of Israel was declared by the leadership of the Zionist movement, and immediately after that, Arab armies from neighboring countries invaded and intervened in the war. The war ended by a very clear victory of the Zionist forces. So this is one major result, that the Jewish state in Palestine survived, the State of Israel survived. Another major implications of the war was that during the war, Israel expelled about 750,000 Palestinians from the territory that became the State of Israel and prevented their return since then. The borders of the newly established State of Israel were larger than what was allocated to the Jewish state by the UN. It included about 78% of the territory of British Mandate Palestine. It did not include the territories we know today as the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. Both of these territories did not exist as distinct territories before 1948. They emerged as a result of the war. Most of the refugees arrived to these territories and remained there in refugee camps, and they and their descendants are there until today. The Arab countries around did not recognize the State of Israel. The Palestinians continued to demand the return of the refugees and the liberation of Palestine. Their hope was the possible unification of Arab countries into a strong force that might liberate Palestine and enable their return. But it didn't happen. In 1967, another round of fighting. Now Israel became victorious again. It occupied, in addition to territories from our countries, the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt, the Golan Heights from Syria, Israel occupied also the rest of British Mandate Palestine, the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. And basically, since then, Israel is controlling in one way or another, in a direct or in indirect way, the entire territory of British Mandate Palestine. Back then, the Palestinians were about 1/3 of the population in this territory. Today, with demographic trends, they became about 1/2 of the population in this territory. And Israel is controlling Palestinians who have different levels of political rights in this territory. You have Palestinians who are citizens of Israel, about 17% of the citizens of Israel who live inside pre-67 Israel. You have Palestinians who lived in the West Bank, who are not citizens of any country. They are subjugated to military rule. This has been the situation since 1967. You have Palestinians in the Gaza Strip who were like Palestinians in the West Bank till 2005 under military rule. And since then, since 1967 until 2005. Since 2005, Israel is an indirect external control of the territory. Israel is in full control of who enters and who exits from the territory, the airspace, the sea, any any commodity or population who is moving, it is under full Israeli control. And in addition to that, Israel established a settlement project inside the West Bank. Today, about 1 out of any 10 Jewish Israelis live in a territory called the West Bank, a territory that Israel has never officially annexed, except part of it in East Jerusalem, a territory that, according to the international law, is not part of Israel, but according to the public perception of Israelis, and if you look at the political map of different ministries, it is part of Israel. And this situation of one regime between the river and the sea, with an extreme imbalance of power, this is the big picture of the conflict since then. There were some attempts to change it. In 1987, the Palestinians revolted in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. For 6 years, they used different means, nonviolent struggle through strikes, demonstrations, also more violence measure through throwing rocks, and later in stage even some cases of armed violence. The main result of what is called the first Intifada was what we know as the Oslo Accord. In 1993, Israel and the PLO, an organization that was established in 1964 and has been perceived as the legitimate representative of the Palestinian people, Israel and the PLO reached an agreement. The agreement was an imbalanced agreement. On the one hand, the PLO recognized the state of Israel and committed to stop the armed struggle. Israel did not recognize the state of Palestine. Israel recognized the PLO as representative of the Palestinian people. But there was no concrete commitment of Israel to establishing a Palestinian state, certainly not about the border, what to do with the very crucial issue of the Palestinian refugees from 1948, what to do with the symbolic topic of Jerusalem. All these issues were postponed to the permanent settlement negotiation that was supposed to end in 5 years. And Israel also did not commit what to do with the settlements in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. The process failed. The process failed because it quickly lost its popularity among both sides. Israel did not stop the settlement project. Actually, between 1993 and 2000, when the process collapsed, the number of settlers doubled. It did not stop. So the Palestinians lost hope that they can really get to the end of the occupation and establishing a Palestinian state through that. On the other hand, from the Palestinian side, those who opposed the process interfere with a series of terrorist attacks against Israeli civilians that significantly eroded the support for the process among Israelis. By 2000, there was not much popularity for the process, especially among Palestinians, because it did not lead anywhere. There was another attempt in 2000 for negotiations in Camp David under American mediation. It failed. Each side blamed the other. The bottom line is that the failure led to the eruption of what is known as the Second Intifada, which was much more violent. It lasted about 4 years. It depends exactly where you put the end of it. About between 3,000 and 4,000 Palestinians were killed. About 1,000 Israelis were killed. And since then, the process did not really recover. There were some minor attempts by Israeli and Palestinian leaders in 2008 that did not lead anywhere. And basically, since 2009, the Israeli government, led by the Likud government most of the time, by Netanyahu, is blocking any attempt for negotiations. And the other thing is that the Palestinians themselves are divided and fragmented in a way that there is no one leadership position of the Palestinians that can make decision. There is a split between the Palestinian Authority, who is controlling a small portion of the West Bank, mainly the cities. It is not a state, and the Hamas, who took control over the internal affair in the Gaza Strip. Both of them do not have full sovereignty of a state. Both of them have certain legitimacy among the population, very limited. And none of them is able to represent the Palestinian people and to establish a unified strategy for the Palestinian people. So what we see in the past 15 years is this a certain status quo when it is not really leading to anywhere. At the same time, Israel is continuing the process of colonization of the West Bank, gaining more and more territories, pushing Palestinians into denser enclaves inside the West Bank. And the Gaza Strip is under very strict siege that limits resources of what people can get there. And this is what led us to the impasse that broke in October 7th in a tremendous and apocalyptic level of violence. So I hope I was able to provide a very quick outline of many, many years of conflict.
Yes, for the immense nuances, that was extremely helpful and that provided very good context. So thank you. I guess, what does, I don't know how well you know polls and whatnot and what you've seen of popular opinion in these places, but for Palestinians in Gaza, what's their opinion of Hamas? For Palestinians in the West Bank, what's their opinion of the PLO? And for Israelis in Israel, what's their opinion of Netanyahu's government?
Okay, well, first, public opinions are very flexible. They can change like that. So whatever we say about public opinion, we should not see this as this is the reality. This is a snapshot, and it is related to the way you phrase the question in a particular day and in a particular context. Having said that, the Palestinians generally are in a state of despair. They did not have much hope even before October 7th. And I think this state of despair did not disappear, although it is very difficult to follow now public opinions. And the Palestinian Authority has lost significant portion, a share of their legitimacy. The Palestinian Authority was supposed to be a temporary arrangement in the Oslo Accords. It was supposed to be a pregnancy stage that will lead to the birth of the Palestinian state. And a pregnancy that lasts forever is not something viable. Once it turned out that the Palestinian Authority is not able to deliver the end of the occupation and to establish a Palestinian state, it lost its legitimacy. Most Palestinians today see the Palestinian Authority as an instrument of the occupation. They do not have any hope that it will lead to a Palestinian state. It might change if the Palestinian Authority will be able that they lead to certain restoration of Palestinian rights, but it does not look that way now. So this is about the popularity of the Palestinian Authority, and the PLO is something that belonged to the past. It's not like we are in the 80s where Palestinians almost everywhere saw the PLO as their representative. We're not in that situation. The Hamas was not popular among Palestinians before October 7th. After October 7th, Hamas looked like the only organization that initiated the dare to challenge the status quo. Whether what the Hamas did actually was helpful for Palestinians, this is something else. That public opinions do not only express, any rational political path, but they express certain emotions of people who react to their despair. And since Hamas was the only one who actually did shake the status quo and did challenge this grid of unshakable, stable occupation and process of dispossession, Hamas gained significant popularity. And I will say that anyone, I think any organization who will be able to show actual ability to challenge the status quo and to bring the end of the occupation and the end of the continuous process of Palestinian dispossession will gain credibility. Regarding inside Israel, Israel has been over the past decade and a half growingly polarized around the around socio-political divide, which on the one side you have the more secular, liberal, middle upper class elite of Israel who aspire to, and I'm saying a very gross generalization, to a certain regime of Jewish supremacy which is based on secular justifications, which allows even certain political autonomy for Palestinians, even a Palestinian state, certain level of equality of the Palestinian citizens of Israel, but it still accepts the very premise of Zionist ideology. On the other side, you have a group of other political category based on more traditional religious point of view. They represent more the lower class of Israel, who is less interested in the democratic image of the country, has less interest in the integration of Israel in the global economy, in the global culture, and therefore it is less sensitive for international condemnation. If the European community or the United States would not consider Israel as a democracy, it is not a big deal for them. Unlike the other camp, who is interested more in the image of democracy than in a real democracy. The focal point of this division became the image of Benjamin Netanyahu itself. A leader who is quite opportunistic, probably also quite corrupt, that in order to ensure his own survival has been ready to really dismantle what left of the democratic institutions in Israel. And this brought many of the secular liberal camp to the streets to very continuous and quite impressive demonstrations against Netanyahu, against its attempts to dismantle the judicial branch in Israel. I see this conflict as a conflict which has a sociological basis between a different group with different interests. It is less a conflict about how Israel should deal with the Palestinians. So, and even now, the antagonism toward Netanyahu among this socio-political milieu is immense. He is being blamed, to a large extent rightfully so, for the disaster of October 7th, when 1,200 Israelis were killed. Most of them are civilians. The civilian population was abandoned by the army, and it is the responsibility of the government. So he is blamed for that. He is blamed for dismantling the judicial system in Israel. He is blamed for deteriorating the image of Israel abroad. He is blamed for the crisis of hundreds of thousands of Israelis who had to leave their houses and do not live in the northern border or in the southern border. They are internal refugees, internally displaced inside Israel. He is blamed for the economic crisis that might even grow more and more. So there is antipathy, common antipathy, at least among, grossly speaking, half of the Jewish population in Israel against Netanyahu. So far, we do not see that it is translated into concrete questioning of the political path of Netanyahu. Netanyahu is criticized, rightfully so, for abandoning the hostages. He refused so far to go for a deal about the hostages. He does not do so because it requires compromise, including a long-term ceasefire and the releasing of all Palestinian prisoners from Israeli prisons. The extreme right elements in his government will not let him do so. And if they leave the government, Netanyahu might not be in power and will not be able to control his own trial for corruption. So basically, Netanyahu right now is ready to sacrifice the hostages. And this brings significant level of anger among many circles in Israeli society. But I emphasize again that the opposition to Netanyahu right now is not because of the crime against humanity that Israel is committing now in Gaza, but because what it does to Jewish Israeli society itself.
Interesting. Now, speaking of Jewish Israeli society, two questions. One, are Arab Israeli citizens treated any differently or not afforded the same rights as Israeli Jewish citizens?
The Palestinian citizens of Israel are in an intermediate political status between the Jewish citizens of Israel, who enjoy full rights of citizens, and the Palestinians who lived in the West Bank, who are not citizens of any country. They are subjugated to military rule. So what is the status of the Palestinian citizens of Israel? First, this category emerged as a result of the war in 1948. About 85% of the Palestinians who lived in the territory that became the state of Israel were expelled. Those who remained were a decapitated society without their elite, with over-proportional share of the population who was illiterate. And most of them lived under military regime for the first 18 years of the state of Israel. Nominally, they became Israeli citizens, they could vote and they could elect, but they suffered from significant discrimination. A lot of significant portion of their lands were confiscated by the state for public use, but the state is mobilized to promote the collective interests of the Jewish people. So when land is taken from private owners who are Arab, it is not brought to the public sphere as neutral. It is brought in order to serve the interest of Jews. And therefore, throughout the existence of Israel, hundreds of new settlements, cities, towns, villages were established for Jews, but not for Arabs. The only town that were established for Arabs were part of the attempt of Israel to concentrate Bedouin tribes in the south in more permanent locations in order to better control the spread over the territory. So it was not done in order to serve the interest of the Arab citizens of Israel, but in order, again, to serve the interest of the Jews. So just to give an example about land policy that has existed since then, and even in 2018 was codified in the law in Israel. In 2018, Israel legislated a new called the nation-state law, which officially states that the state of Israel favors settlements of Jews. Until there, Israel was relatively careful not to put in law explicit discriminative laws against Arabs. Most forms of discrimination was seemingly ethnically blind, but it does not mean that they were not there. Okay, one major example of discrimination is the law of return. Every Jew who is immigrated to the country, can gain Israeli citizenship. Palestinians were expelled, or their parents, grandparents were expelled from the country and have families inside Israel, are not able to do the same. So this is a major discriminative policy between Jews and Arabs. But there are also many other forms of discrimination. For example, so many jobs in Israel are advertised as one of the requirements is being after military service. Since the vast majority of Palestinian citizens of Israel are exempted from military service, they cannot apply even for these jobs. Another form of discrimination is that
Interesting.
a party in the Israeli election cannot even run to the election if they do not accept Israel as a Jewish state. So if your platform is that the state belongs to all its citizens and only to its citizens, you cannot even run for in the Israeli elections. So that from the beginning it limits the potential of what Palestinian citizens of Israel can achieve in Israeli politics.
Has it always been like that, or has it gotten exceptionally bad recently?
There have been different periods. In sometimes it looked like it's going to be improve, but it didn't really improve. I will give you just some example. In the first 18 years, Palestinian citizens of Israel are under military rule. What does it mean? In the beginning, it meant that even if you wanted to leave your village, you needed the permission of the military ruler. But you were a citizen. Later, just if you wanted to leave from one region to the other, you needed the permit of the military rule. If you wanted to open a business, you need the permit of the military governor. If you wanted to open a newspaper, a soccer club, you needed the permission of the military governor. It was a very strict system of control and surveillance. And it also served the purpose of preventing the return of refugees by force and the expropriation of Palestinian land. Later, since 1967, there was a gradual process of relative liberalization. It reached its peak in 1992, between 1992 and 1995. In these years, for the first time, an Israeli Prime Minister, Yitzhak Rabin, dared to rely on the votes of Arab parties in the parliament, in the Israeli Knesset. His government was dependent on votes of Palestinian citizens. And in that particular period, they were able to use their leverage in order to close some gaps in, for example, in budget allocations for Arab and Jewish localities. There was a slight improvement, and there also was a significant legitimacy, at least among parts of Israeli society, for the Arab citizens as the legitimate part of the Israeli political system. This ended by the murder, the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin. Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated in November 1995 in relation to the Oslo process, but a significant part of the delegitimation of his government was based on the fact that he dared to rely on Arab Palestinian votes for the survival of his government. And since his assassination, we've seen a gradual reversal of this process. And it became much worse after the beginning of the Second Intifada in 2000. What we see over the past decade that on the one hand, Arab Palestinians have better integration in the Israeli economy. We see more Arab Palestinians in high-tech industry, in certain economic sectors. There is a certain stronger integration in an economic level, but politically they're being pushed more and more to a defensive place. Since the October 7th, most of my Palestinian friends who are citizens of Israel went underground in social media. They do not dare even to bring their opinions because they take a risk. The students were suspended from their positions. Teachers were being harassed. Even there is in our case of a teacher that has been arrested and now might be indicted for inciting for violence, for really ridiculous accusation. Now, the sentiment among Palestinian citizens of Israel that they're not even able to open their mouth and to protest about what's happening to their own people in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank.
Off the top of your head, how many people have died since in this conflict, Israelis and Palestinians, since the creation of Israel?
Well, I would say that it depends where you start the conflict. But I think the Palestinians have more than 100,000 casualties at this point. Uh, Israelis around 30,000 casualties, more or less. You should add to this Arabs who are not Palestinians, Egyptian soldiers, Syrian soldiers. Thousands of them died in wars against Israel.
I guess my next question would be Zionism has become almost like almost like a dirty word in a way, right? It's become really associated with the death and destruction of Palestinian people. Was the initial creation of Zionism, what was its goal and how has it morphed?
Modern Zionism emerged in Europe as a reaction to modern predicament of European Jews who suffered from discrimination, from persecution, from violence in different level, in different parts of Europe. It emerged in the context of the emergence of nationalism in Europe. The ideology of nationalism is that the world is divided into different nations. Each one has their own culture, and each nation should be sovereign and govern itself. This is the ideology of nationalism. And Zionism emerged in this context. The new ideology stated that Jews are not only a religious category, but they're also a separate nation. And if they are a separate nation, they should also govern themselves. But since they were not in the same territory, they were supposed to gather in one territory and establish this new national community. At the turn of the century, different ideas were raised about where exactly this national community should be established. There were some other ideas than Palestine, but since Palestine is also the land of Israel, a country which has a special place in Jewish religion, Jews have been prayed to return to Zion for thousands of years. Every day in a Jewish marriage, if you know, when the groom is breaking the glasses, is supposed to symbolize the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. So it has a certain important place. This is why it was easier to mobilize Jews everywhere toward this idea of immigrating to Palestine, to the land of Israel, rather than to any other country. So the immigration to Palestine starts with this ideology of establishing this homeland for the Jewish people. So this is the image of Zionism as it is seen by the Zionists themselves as a national movement. But from the Palestinian point of view, it is a form of settler colonialism. Back then, they did not use the term settler colonialism, but they clearly, from a very early stage, used the term colonialism to describe what they experienced. And they experienced their gradual dispossession. And from a very early point, they were anxious that this plan of the Zionists to settle their country will lead to their elimination. And indeed, to a large extent, this is what happened. Initially, when Jews arrived to the country, they gained control over the territory by economic means. So you could say, okay, this is a free market of land. The point is that once land was purchased by the Jewish National Fund, which was the financial arm of the Zionist movement, by the rules of the Jewish National Fund, it could not be sold to non-Jews. So from the moment it entered the circle, the Zionist, to the Zionist hands, it was taken out of the market. Now the market was not relevant anymore.
Where did the money come from that arm that bought the land?
From donations of Jews everywhere who believed in this ideology of the revival of the Jewish people in its ancestral land. It was a very deep belief, and also Jews, especially in the Western world, believed that this is a way to redeem them from their own predicament. So,
Were any outside countries putting in money into this, or
no,
was it primarily grassroots?
no, it was not. There were no governments, as much as I know, who were involved in funding. The contribution of government was mainly by the very tangible support that the British Empire supported for the Zionist project by allowing and encouraging this immigration, at least in the first decades of British control over Palestine. But the money was really based on donations of Jews from all over the country, both big donations and small donations of Jews who believed in this ideology. Now, in the war of 1948, the means of acquiring land was extended from the economic issue. Now, the Zionist narrative about the war is that, look, we accepted international law, we agreed to the partition plan, the Arab side refused, and they tried violently to prevent it. We just defended ourselves, and they left. The issue with this argument that if you look at even the borders of the partition plan in 1947, had all the Palestinians remained in their place, there would have not been a Jewish state with a stable Jewish majority. The way to create a significant Jewish majority was only by remove these Arabs. Yeah, but significant Jewish immigration, but this would have not been enough to have a majority that was required to define the state as a Jewish state. So the drastic demographic shift was built in the need to establish a Jewish state. And indeed, whether you call it that expulsion or just that people escaped because they were afraid of their life, during the war, at a very early stage, in June 1948, the Israeli government decided to prevent the return of the Palestinian refugees. And actually, for the next few years, violently prevented people from return. Thousands of Palestinians were killed on the borders when they tried to return. So wow. There was here a violent process of dispossession Palestinians that was built in the Zionist ideology that aspired to reshape the demography of the country. And after 1967, the same logic of expansion and dispossession was implemented in the West Bank. So the fact that today we have 10% of the Jewish population who live in the West Bank is because this has been the aspiration of the Zionist movement from a very early stage. Now, there are voices, and there have always been voices inside the Zionist movement who said, look, we don't need the entire territory. We should take only part of it just to ensure our majority. These voices have been extremely marginalized in Israel over the past 20 years. The current government and also the previous government that ruled only for 1 year and a half recently did not challenge this situation. That basically the Israeli system of control is between the river and the sea, regardless if there is a stable Jewish majority there or not. So if I'm going back to your question about what Zionism is, historically, from the Jewish Zionist point of view, Zionism is the realization of the national aspiration of the Jewish people for a homeland, which is a relatively new phenomenon. In the 18th century, Jews everywhere did not think about themselves as a separate nation. And even though there were some cultural and religious aspiration to return to the land of Israel, they were not translated into a political plan to establish Jewish sovereignty. So these are two separate things. The religious aspiration was mobilized for the national project. So this is from the point of view of Jews. But from the point of view of Palestinians, this and in the concrete experience of Palestinians, this is a colonizing project that has been dispossessing them for many decades, since the beginning of the 20th century until these days. Now, you can people still say, I know some people says, look, I'm against any dispossession of Palestinians, but I believe in the spiritual idea of the return of the Jewish people to its ancestral homeland. This is my Zionism. So you can accept that there is this aspiration, as long as it does not come on the expense of the people who live there. So you can believe in this spiritual return, and from the point of view of human rights, as long as you do not dispossess anyone, there is no problem with that. The problem is that we have also an empirical experience of what is Zionism. You can say that there is a theoretical mode of Zionism that is democratic and it is unharmful, but it remains in theory. What happened in practice is that the Zionist movement has dispossessed Palestinians, has created an apartheid-like regime between the river and the sea. So this is the social reality. Now, whether you dismantle this regime by saying I dismantle Zionism or not, this is less important. If you can, the new regime that might be created, whether you call it Zionism, this is less important. The important is to create a political unit where everyone is equal and no one is subjected to an ethnic supremacy of the other side.
So should probably wrap up soon, because I'm not sure. I could listen for hours and hours of finding this history of it, but it's important to keep the attention of the people, and we're all used to 7 seconds on social media if that's what's catching attention. But one question I did want to ask is that, correct me if I'm wrong, but I read that obviously being Israeli, you have to be in the army for 2 years. It's a requirement. However, you were going to be pulled out of the reserves and you refused.
Every Jewish Israeli man is required for 3 years of service. Women are required for less, about 2 years. I was recruited to the military service like other Jewish citizens of my age. This is what everyone is doing after they finish high school. Very few people are able to ask questions of what is the purpose of that. And even though I grew up in a liberal Zionist house, so we thought that there should be a Palestinian state, this is how we're educated, but for now, we respect the rule of the game, we are serving until there will be a political position. So I was buying into this narrative that I live in a democracy, so I do what the government is saying to do, and I follow these orders. But there has been a gradual process for me of education, of learning, of being exposed to the Palestinian point of view.
Absolutely. I just read in 2002, you were going to be pulled out of the reserves and that you refused. You refused to go back to service.
Already in the mid-90s, I informed my unit that I'm not going to serve in the occupied territories, but I did it as a private step. I did not make a public political statement out of that. But when the second Intifada started, even though I was not anymore in service, I was already abroad in a postdoctorate, but at that point I retroactively added my name to the list of soldiers, of reserve soldiers, who published a letter stating that they refuse to serve in the occupied territories. So at this point, I made a public statement that I'm also part of this movement, and even if we will be called, I will refuse to serve in the occupied territories. Practically, unlike some of my friends, I did not pay any price because I was abroad. People who did refuse, many of them went to jail, served some military, some time in prison in military jail. I was spared that, but certainly I supported them. I made public lectures in Europe and the United States in order to mobilize support for these soldiers, and I still believe that this is both the moral thing to do, and that if enough soldiers will refuse to serve the criminal purpose of this regime, we will bring a closer end to the conflict.
Are you allowed to go back to Israel?
At the moment, I am allowed to go. I know that some people who expressed views who are similar to myself have been arrested. Some people were arrested, both Jews and Palestinians. I'm a little bit more protected because I'm not Palestinian, so I'm less in danger. I think that right now, my estimate is right now, if I will go back, I don't think that we will be harassed, interrogated, or arrested. Not yet. But in the near future, it is becoming a more and more plausible scenario. I haven't been in the country since October, basically since last year. It will be an interesting test when I will land there later, and I will update you what's happening.
Yeah, let me know if I get a call from your jail cell. Hopefully not. But as we close, is there anything else that you would like to say regarding this?
We are in a very dire circumstances. There is a genocide going on there. I know not everyone agreed with this definition, but whether you agree to the legal definition or not, we have a situation where already dozens of thousands of Palestinians were killed, most of them civilians, and the number of people who might perish as a result of hunger, thirst, diseases might be larger. And it is likely, according to public health experts, we are going toward apocalyptic number of 6 digits of casualties. And this is done by an intentional policy of the states of Israel. So first, I think that we have to mobilize forces in the short term in order to stop that. For the long term, I think we won't find any solution if Palestinians and Israelis will not come together. They should work together based not just in order to make reconciliation, but a joint struggle in order to dismantle the regime, and a joint struggle in order to create a new political arrangement where Palestinians and Israelis share equally the country. And I do not say one state or two states. There could be different arrangements, but the basic idea is that everyone is equal. There is an equal rights for self-determination for both sides. There should be a recognition of the past injustice and dispossession of the Palestinians and a realistic attempt to correct them. And this should happen through a joint struggle of Palestinians and Israelis who believe in these principles.
Those are great words to end on. So, Tamir, thank you so much for making the time for this. Thank you so much for educating us. It was very, very helpful to understand how we got here. So thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.